It is the Audible live here on our YouTube channel, and thank you, StreamYard, for everything that you do. It is Sigmund Bloom, Dr. Jene Bramel, Matt Waldman, and I'm your host, Cecil Lammey, as we talk all things NFL and fantasy football. And Andrew Luck, Dr. Jene, we've got to start there, because just when you think the shoulder's fine, and then it's a calf thing, and now it's a bone thing, and then it's an ankle thing, but it's not an Achilles thing, KD. What in the blank, sorry, Joe, is going on with Andrew Luck?
I don't think anybody knows yet, and I think that's mostly the issue. So we'll keep this short and sweet. There's been a number of reports about calf issues and then ankle pain and bone, this or that or the other, and some speculation of what that may be. It would seem from Chris Ballard's press conference on Monday night that the Colts don't know yet. They think they may have narrowed it down. They think that the subspecialist visits that they've seen and the second and third opinions he's gotten have led them in the right direction. But he even said, Ballard said, he can't guarantee that they know what's happening. So not only that, but the fact that Luck hasn't practiced in some time. The last time he didn't look great. Frank Reich saying yesterday or today, all these days are running together for me now, that they want to make a decision after the third preseason game. That's a week away, and he hasn't been on the practice field since July, and he's not in the Colts, and presumably Luck, who doesn't usually talk about these things, are not sure what's going on yet. So without knowing precisely, or at least even close to what the injury is, or seeing him on the practice field in some regard, it's hard to trust that the Colts are going to be ready to play him in week one. I felt after we got some information from Ballard and Irsay this week that it was becoming more and more questionable. Luck would be ready for week one, and not knowing what comes after that. But right now, Reich, I think he essentially told us that Luck is a long shot to play in week one. We heard a little bit of, it was called guarded optimism from Chris Mortensen earlier tonight. So maybe that means it's a little bit of a shorter term thing than we hope, and gives a sliver of hope that we'll see Luck in week one. But I think we have to operate under the assumption that he'll miss at least 1 week and then potentially more. He's already told us that he doesn't really want to play if he doesn't feel like he can play at full strength. So we'll see. There's been a lot of ins and outs and what have yous, as Mr. Lebowski would say there. And it's hard to know. I was hoping that we could trust what Luck had told us in the beginning, which is it's still a calf strain. If we had a game this week, I would play. And now that we haven't seen him on the practice field other than standing off to the side, and he hasn't addressed the media after Irsay and Ballard did, it's hard to know where we are. So I'm sticking with questionable, and I'm leaning towards doubtful for week one, and I'm hoping to be pleasantly surprised next week.
Gene, speaking of being pleasantly surprised, and I'd love to see. We need to get Cecil a director's chair with his name on it now. So we have a long list of players, Gene, that are hopeful, ready for the season opener, and we could step through each one of those guys, and some are more important than others. But how much do you trust teams that are saying that, teams that are shutting down players for the rest of camp and preseason? And when I ask this question, is there anybody that comes to mind that is especially suspect for you with that hopefully ready for week one designation?
Yeah, I don't trust teams this time of year. They're under no obligation to provide any sort of actual accurate injury report. We know that over the last few years, we used to see week 3 as a dress rehearsal, and now teams don't care at all if players, especially critical veterans, participate in the preseason. If you follow Twitter and you have some of the beat writers say this is the list of players who aren't going to play, and I know the rosters are still at 90, but it's essentially every starter. Anybody that has any concern at all is not going to go, and unless the story puts together. So let's use Jerick McKinnon as an example. When you have a player whose rehab is presumably going well, who is not able to start camp on the active roster because of overzealous rehab, who after 2 days of relatively light practice is shut down again and needs an injection, I think we're hearing that he's not somebody that we're hearing is probable for week one despite missing time. But when the story goes together like that, it's pretty easy to see that he's outside the range of, okay, well, we're just being cautious and we're doing veteran rest, and there's no sense in putting these guys in harm's way before the season gets here. But that's sort of what you're looking for with the vast majority of these other guys. Unless we have a newer injury or a very specific concern, they're probably going to practice in week 1. I'm not really concerned about anybody in particular where we've been worried about them throughout the preseason. I think Kiki Kuti is somebody that, is probably going to go right up against week 1 and we have to be concerned about. I think Derrick Henry is still somebody that might come up against week 1 that we have to be concerned about. Everybody else, either we know that there's an ongoing issue, be it AJ Green or Andrew Luck or Jerick McKinnon, those sorts of players that they're not, that they truly are questionable for week 1, and we may not know until we see what their continued rehab and recovery is. But everybody else is likely to get there. The other thing that you have to be concerned about is if you've seen a player that's had a recurrent or an aggravated soft tissue injury. Paris Campbell would come to mind there. Would be a player that is very much questionable as well until you see them return to practice successfully. So I think this time next week, in through the weekend after the third week of preseason games, we're going to have a little bit better sense of who is back to practice after that third preseason game, whether or not they played or not, and preparing to get ready for week 1 because we'll be 2 weeks out at that point.
Well, the candy store of fantasy football prognostication seems to be the San Francisco 49ers. I mean, it just seems like you can pick something off the shelf and justify why you want it. And Trent Taylor's a guy, though, that's probably usually left on a lot of those candy shelves, just for the reason is that he's a slot receiver, he's short, and so they look at him and they decide Jalen Hurts seems like more of an exciting, shiny, bright and shiny toy, and then you have Deebo Samuel who can play in the slot a little bit, and of course you also still have Dante Pettis, and I'll throw a bone to Marquise Goodwin to make Bloom happy. But yeah,
not Richie James.
Not Richie James, no, because that's too much. That's too close to home. So Trent Taylor, when you look at that, he has got that right fifth metatarsal fracture. What does that mean for his ability to actually perform and be a strong performer this year if he comes back, as said, maybe week 2, week 3?
This is, even though it's a bone injury and not a soft tissue situation, we've seen time and time and time again with these wide receivers in particular, if they try to recover as quickly as possible, that they are at higher risk of re-breaking that foot, needing a revision surgery a little bit sooner than you might have otherwise expected. And I think that's where we are with Taylor right now. There was trying to be a little bit of optimism with these guys that with Taylor in particular, that the fracture was incomplete and that somehow made it more likely for him to recover in 4 to 6 weeks rather than some of the 6 to 12 range that we've seen with some of these guys in the past. But they put a screw into the foot, so at that point, whether it was an incomplete fracture or not, it was fixed with a screw. So we still have to allow that to heal. There's still some issues that go along with that we've seen in the past. So when I heard 4 to 6 weeks, 6 weeks always seems quick. We saw it with Des Bryant, we saw it with Julian Edelman, we've seen it with Greg Olsen in the past. These injuries need time to heal, and although there may be, the surgical procedure allows them to rehab a little bit sooner and be pain free a little bit sooner, that doesn't necessarily mean they're healed well enough to take the rigors of an NFL game. So I think for him, the longer his recovery goes, arguably the better. So if we don't see him for 8 to 10 weeks, he's much more likely to come back and last through the regular season than if they do try to get him back on the practice field and put him in a strenuous situation at 4 to 5 weeks.
It is the Audible Live here on our YouTube channel, and I want to know, chat room, do you prefer the Brady Bunch little view here, or is it this camera 1, camera 2, camera 1, camera 2? Like, which view do you like better? Of course, the solo view is the one that I love the most, in HD even. But Dr. Gene, we do have a question from the chat room a little bit earlier today about Amari Cooper and this, what are they calling it? It's plantar fascia irritation. Okay, that's plantar fascia, right? That's not good, right? What do you think about Amari Cooper's foot?
Yeah, I think this is another situation where what we've been told doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think we heard a ligament issue. We heard a just fascial irritation. We heard strain. None of those things really fit together very well. So, this is, I kind of joked around with the Andrew Luck situation. A lot of times we're hearing a non-medical person try to translate something that they heard from a source who wasn't a medical person that got it from, somebody close to the player or the situation. So to try to get those things translated makes it very difficult. Plantar fascia irritation, a little bit of plantar fasciitis, some inflammation in that area is a relatively common thing, especially at the beginning of the year. I wouldn't consider it a typical soft tissue injury like a muscle strain, but these are things that can happen. And if you allow them to cool down, sometimes they do. Sometimes, like with any sort of tendonitis, it can last a little bit longer and become an issue. It does not sound like this is an Antonio Gates type of situation from a few years ago where he had a tear in the plantar fascia that he tried to play through, and we were worried about, is it going to rupture and feel better? Is it going to linger a little bit? The tone of those reports made it sound like this isn't a big concern. He should be recovered in time to practice and play in week 1. He would be a player that, although we don't have a great grasp on what may be going on, he would fit into the category that until we see him not practicing at a time where he really needs to be practicing to prepare for week 1, that we probably don't need to be concerned. So for now, I've got him in the probable category. If this bleeds through another 10 days and we're looking at 3 weeks of rehab before they put him back on the practice field at all, then I think it's time to be concerned. But my sense is we'll probably see him start to do some individual drills soon and be moving on with the anticipation that he'll be fully practicing in advance of week 1.
Gene, what's going on with Trey Burton? Sports hernia surgery has been one of those ones that, in so much as there are ones that seem routine and we don't see setbacks, we don't see players go beyond the return to play timeline. Hernia seems like one of those, but the Bears are being a little squirrely about this. Not to bring up your old friend. He's not practicing. He didn't have a setback. Anytime a team says he didn't have a setback, my first thought is, he had a setback. Did he have a setback?
Well, there's some reason that they're holding him out of practice, right? So he was cleared to do a little bit more in practice today. Maybe this was the plan all along. Is whatever he was feeling related to the surgery he had in the offseason, or was it just a little compensatory thing? All those things are hard to know. We're not going to hear from Chicago whether or not that's the case. If his return to practice goes well, probably nothing to see here. Again, like so many of these other players, as we get closer to September, if we're not recovering enough to at least practice enough to then get a veteran rest day, where the opposite happens, where maybe only practice 1 or 2 days a week just to see where we are in the recovery process, then no harm, no foul, and we'll see how things go.
All right, Gene, let's do an IDP twofer, even though this isn't an IDP show. I want to get on your good side again. So let's talk a little bit about Tyrone Crawford. He has hip surgery, underrated defensive tackle for the Cowboys. Want to know a little bit more about the details of that hip surgery, if you can provide it. And if not, tell me a little bit more about Bobby Wagner and the PRP injection and how you feel about that for the oncoming season for him, and whether his fantasy owners should still rely on him as an LB1.
There's still a handful of pretty important players on that Dallas defense, DeMarcus Lawrence chiefly among them, but Tyrone Crawford, as you said, is an important part of that scheme and what he can bring up the middle and as a nickel pass rusher. We didn't get any specific details about hip surgery, whether it was a labral thing or whether or not they were trying to treat some hip impingement or something along those lines. The expectation from the beginning of the camp that it has been that he is likely to return. That hasn't happened yet, unless it happened in the last 24 hours, and I'm not aware of it on the transaction wire. So, again, he's another player that you would hope that, like Damon Harrison was today, and like Cam Robinson was on the offensive line for Jacksonville, that the guys that we're not really sure where they stand do get activated in this all-important middle of camp window so they get conditioned and ready to go. And the same goes for Bobby Wagner. A lot of the Seattle players have had these injections over the past couple of summers, and Wagner's been included. Whether or not it's been helpful, or whether or not the extra rest they get by calming themselves down after the arthroscopic surgery is what has allowed them to return. Most of these players, from KJ Wright to Frank Clark to Bobby Wagner to Earl Thomas to others over the years, have these injections, take 2 or 3 weeks off, and then seem to do okay. Now, how big a concern there was, whether or not these injections they've hit on the right concentration and it's been a little bit more successful, it's almost impossible to know. I haven't heard anything that's been concerning about Wagner just yet, but again, group him in the list of players that we got to see him not participating in a preseason game, but at least getting himself in condition in advance of week 1 so that he can take a full week of practice and be ready to assume the every down role that he's played for so long.
It is the Audible Live, and Joe King in the chat room reacting to me, well, to Dr. Gene anyway, says extreme frostbite and now a confused calf. Gene providing the quality team name suggestions. So we are here for you. So many ways I could go with a couple of wide receivers. I'll go with the more major one, I guess, in Keenan Allen. Not going to play the rest of the preseason, hurt his ankle this week. What's your level of concern there?
The same. I think we're at least getting a relative for Odell Beckham, for Keenan Allen, for Amari Cooper. The uniform consensus seems to be redundancy that is that those players have relatively minor injuries, and we know that they are critical parts of the offense, and there's no reason to risk an aggravation at this point. Without video, it's hard to know what type of ankle sprain it is, what type of ankle injury it is, but there doesn't seem to be as much concern for some of these guys as others. I think maybe we put Kenyon Drake in a little bit of a different category because he's been seen with a walking boot, but that's not been the case with some of these wide receivers. So I'm hopeful that we'll see Keenan Allen rest a little bit and then come back in time to condition as well.
So many directions to go here, Gene. I guess I want to ask you just a personal opinion, because you brought up something earlier about how teams are now not playing players. Sean McVay comes to mind. He's not even going to play the two new starters on the offensive line. Do you agree with that? Do you think that the preseason and playing in the preseason was an important function for these players keeping their durability over the course of the season? Or do you think teams, maybe there was some sports science, Chip Kelly, something behind it, that have actually wised up to the reality of the rigors of the 16-game season and save these guys some hits? Go ahead.
I think there's an argument in both directions. I think what you hope is that over the past decade or so, with the improvements in nutrition and the improvements in off-season conditioning and weightlifting, and these players seeing this as a 12-month a year job and needing to stay in condition all that time, most players are passing conditioning tests, and they're getting tested either in the first couple of days with some GPS data or in the conditioning tests themselves to make sure they're in condition. I think more important than anything else is to have an understanding of what's going to be asked of them during the season, be in condition to allow that to happen, and be fundamentally sound. So I would assume that there's lots of people that would make the argument that the lack of hitting that we're seeing all the way through OTAs and otherwise is detrimental to how a player approaches the regular season, and they're not in contact shape as game one starts. But I don't know that we've seen that on the field much. I think there's just as good an argument likely that keeping those guys out of a situation where they get banged up a little bit in July and then have 6 months of a season to look forward to, practice and playing time. It doesn't seem like we've seen much player drop off with the less practice. I mean, there's very rarely any hitting during the weeks of practice. So these guys don't do a lot of hitting other than on Sundays, except in rare old school coaching cases. So I don't think we've seen much drop off in the level of play. I haven't done a specific enough study to count up who's on the injury report and how many players may be lingering longer. But from the conferences I've been to and what I've seen anecdotally, it doesn't strike me that that's the case. A couple of years ago, I did a little bit of comparison from one set of injury reports to another. I haven't done that in the last 2 or 3 years, where I didn't really notice all that much. We did that in anticipation of trying to learn whether or not the NFL removing the probable tag would be more difficult to help us with questionable and otherwise, and it didn't really seem to be the case in comparison from one year to the next. So I guess I don't have a great answer to that question. I'm not too concerned about that. I would imagine there's probably some coaches and coaching staffs that feel differently.
Well, here's another question that may kind of fit into, kind of related to Bloom, just kind of asking you your opinion on something, or maybe you may know a little bit more about this, but I'm not sure if it's your purview. Still, Antonio Brown and the helmet, okay? And, I know a lot of people, we even got a little bit of laughter about Antonio Brown and the helmet just now. Nate Jackson wrote an incredible article on Deadspin that really drives home some points that I think are very relevant and lost in just kind of the laughter about the whole Antonio Brown saga, which is that a player's equipment can feel like their second skin, and especially a helmet, and trying to just replace that equipment out of hand, like right away, it can be a really difficult thing for a player who's played, a good part of 15 years as a wide receiver and has grown over those years to a point where they're comfortable in that helmet, and have to make a sudden change like that can be very difficult. One of the points that Nate Jackson brought up is that no helmet, even though the helmets may be labeled as being certified by a governing body, his point was that that it's kind of a political body, and that it's kind of a sham, because no helmet is actually going to prevent the injuries that occur that they're worried about. So why shouldn't he be able to use the helmet that he already has, other than that it's outdated and the NFL doesn't want to go through the process of having to certify a helmet that nobody really uses that much anymore. So can you parse this out a little bit for us and tell us, your thoughts on this situation?
Sure. That's not a sham. There's nothing that's a sham about that. I appreciate where he's coming from there. But there are, even though I'm in full agreement that no helmet is currently designed, or that we've thought of that's likely to be designed in the future, is going to be 100% protective against concussions. Helmets are meant to keep you from getting your head bashed up, skull fractures and the like. But because of the way concussions occur and the rotational aspect of those things, it's not just the helmet to helmet hit. It can be that, but the rotational component is not something, if you slap a helmet that covers your head and the helmet moves with your head, that you can think that you can stop a concussion. However, if you watch the older games and newer games, if you look at the newer helmets, they have a little bit of an extension down the jawline that helps prevent some of the rotational component around the jaw and otherwise, and those helmets have been proven to be a little bit safer. There are different helmets with different areas of cushioning, the way they've been designed to have a little bit of air in them as well, to have a little bit of cushion to soften the blow a little bit. No, none of those helmets are going to prevent concussions, but yes, some of them are a little bit more protective than others. There is a reasonable argument to say, well, if the NFL is not testing every helmet of every year going back, that there's that maybe we are preventing players from using a helmet that is safe enough for them, or that they may choose to use. I saw some discussion on Twitter about whether or not players should be allowed to sign waivers to use certain types of equipment. I think the NFL is coming from the right place in this regard. Let's try to, and they do this with shoes too. This shoe is more likely to stick in the turf. This shoe is more likely to result in a high ankle sprain or something else. You may want to consider something different than this. And over the years, because that's been successful and because companies are responding to that a little bit, they are crossing certain things off the list. This helmet is, by testing, and it's not a sham, by testing biomechanically and through physics, not as safe as the other options. And say what you want about maybe these players agreeing ahead of time. This is different than what happened 25 years ago when they were told X was safe, Y was safe, we're not worried about this.
Here, take this drug.
Yeah. I mean, if you put the information in front of the player, I think there's an argument to be made about that. Should the NFL step up and try to protect some of these players from themselves? But we saw the same things with, for a while, players very rarely wore any sort of hip padding or thigh padding or knee pads that came over the knee, and some of that has been mandated a little bit as well. We talked about the shoes a little bit too. So I think that the sham comment, I appreciate where that is coming from. I don't know that Nate probably meant that in that regard necessarily. Right. But when I've talked to people about this, and when I've seen some of the results of how this is being done, the helmets being tested, the shoes being tested, it's being done with the player's best interest in mind. Again, there's a whole extra component of that there may be an argument against, but to say that it's just because it's a 10-year-old helmet, it's not being tested, and Brown should be able to wear it, and no helmet is going to prevent a concussion. There's a kernel of truth in all of that, but there's a reason that these testing has been done, and I think it's with the player's best interest in mind. And the NFLPA has their stamp on these posters that go in the locker rooms about the shoes and the helmets as well. It's not just the league saying this is what it is. Both sides of this issue are on board with how this is progressing.
It is the Audible Live here Thursday nights, youtube.com/footballguys, DOTCOM. You're also listening to this on iTunes. We certainly appreciate all you out there. Matt, a couple of questions for you before we let Gene out of here, because I got to get Gene's reaction as well, because our man Jacob 2680 Moses, did Wildman let his hair go crazy to fit his Knicks name? Got some Dapper Dan hair gel up in here. Way to go, Wildman.
No, this is just called Preseason. That's basically what this is called.
Trying out some new hairstyles, seeing what works, seeing what experimenting, just like with Chicago and Trubisky.
There you go.
Just like with our camera angles tonight, all right, fellas? Yeah. By the way, Matt, do you know who Nate Jackson hates? And he's one of our boys. And Nate Jackson hates him. Like, hates him. Put him in his book. There's so much that he hates him. Do you have any guesses?
Daniel Jeremiah?
Nope. Frank Schwab.
Wow.
Yeah. Can you believe that? Somebody actually hates Frank Schwab. Like, Frank Schwab's the coolest guy on the planet.
Yeah.
You kidding me?
All
right. Dr. Gene, we certainly appreciate your time as always, brother, and thank you very much for joining the show.
Always. See you guys next week. Thanks.
All right, there we have him. Dr. Jene Bramel, ladies and gentlemen. Extreme close-up.
Extreme close-up.
Oh, it is fun here on the Audible. And again, thanks to chat room for reacting to all of us. Lots of stuff to get to tonight, including, I think we'll start in Miami. Let's go there, Wildman. Let's talk about Kalen Ballage. This is happening. First and foremost, they've never really believed in Kenyon Drake. Now they're believing in Kalen Ballage. What can fantasy GMs expect from Ballage as the Dolphins lead back?
Well, they believe that they're going to be able to stave off the flood in Miami too. So I guess that Kalen Ballage is probably on par with the course here. So I mean, I look at this, and to be fair to Kalen Ballage, he's a big back with speed. He has some power when he can get downhill. He can catch the football. There's some things to work with here, but it's kind of funny to me because just as when Kenyon Drake has really developed his game to the point that he can be a reliable counted-on contributor, the fact that they're moving on with Ballage is just interesting to me. And I wonder if any of these coaches had say in the Patriots scouting circles when they continue to misdraft, skill players all these years, and whether they're part to blame with some of this. But to be perfectly honest, I mean, you're going to give Kalen Ballage a chance. He's going to get a lot of opportunities, and fantasy football isn't always like real football. So you have to talk about, really who gets the opportunities. And even if the opportunities weren't deserved, or maybe are debatable whether he can really do the job, they're going to try and let him grow into this role. And you're going to probably see mixed results. And we'll see if he can kind of learn on the go here. And if he does, he's probably going to give you at least flex play opportunity out of that volume with a high end of probably running back too. But if Kenyon Drake continues to drop, if you're drafting in September and Kenyon Drake starts to drop towards the 10th round or a little beyond, you got to take him. I mean, he's an electric player who has really started, came to Miami being a really raw player and has developed over the years fairly quickly. So this is the year where I think he's actually deserved some of the love, and here he is not getting any of it all from his coaching staff.
And why is that, Bloom? Is it because the Dolphins are tanking? By the way, I think we should roll the Clowney conversation into this because what was it? Yahoo? Was it Trez Paler? Had the article that their quarterback idea for next year leads them into not trading for Clowney, although there was, rumblings that they were one of the 10 or so teams that would be interested. And, we've always had the debate, Bloom, are these guys tanking or not?
I don't think that they're managing the roster to create the most number of losses, okay? I would say that they are managing. I mean, when I say managing the roster, what I mean is they're not deploying Kalen Ballage on purpose because they think he's not as good as Kenyon Drake in an effort to lose the game. I don't think they're going to watch Ryan Fitzpatrick and Josh Rosen and say, let's pick the guy who we think gives us a lesser chance to win the game. That being said, I'm not, to cut to the chase on the fantasy side of this, I'm not chasing Ballage. And in fact, although I did see you say some more positive things about Noah Fant this week, I actually I've been shopping Noah Fant. I had him because of a developmental pick, and I've been shopping him around because I wanted to try to cash in on his speculative value, and I actually turned him into TJ Hawkinson, who has that
Holy cow!
Yeah,
What?
using Balaj.
What?
I did Fant and Balaj for Hawkins.
You took Hawkinson?
I took Fant a year ago, partially because of Bruce Feldman's freaks list, and I knew Fant was the next tight end. This is a tight end premium league. I don't want to get into no one cares about your team, but I was happy to use Balaj to turn Fant, who may or may not turn into something eventually, and into Hawkinson, who I think, as long as Detroit doesn't grossly misuse him, is based on everything we're hearing and what we know about him, is on his way to becoming a star. Anyway, I think that Balaj, and Matt and I have talked about Drake and Balaj before in this fashion, where they come into the league with these incredible tools. Because if you look for the positive notes on Balaj these last few days in the combined practices, and what's really interesting about these combined practices, by the way, is you get the reactions, just the knee-jerk reactions of the other team's beat writers about some of the players. And some of the reactions we're seeing about Balaj is, wow, he's fast, big, strong. And I think that shows out well in a practice setting. But I think that when we see him behind Miami's offensive line, which had Josh Rosen running for his life, et cetera, I mean, it's an uphill battle for any running back. But for Balaj, who I think will be a little overwhelmed at first against Baltimore in week 1, I think we're going to see him go by the wayside pretty quickly. And I really like what Matt said about, hey, if this causes Kenyon Drake to fall farther or even perish the thought past Balaj and ADP, then you move to Drake. So I'm not looking to Balaj. I'm not seeing this as a potential success story for him. The only Miami player that I might be interested in taking late right now is Preston Williams. And if we really want to go into like hot topic, and I'm not saying that this is hot take land, but with Kenny Stills and personally, it's funny after what Matt said about climate change, like, let's get political. I respect what Kenny Stills is doing, but with Kenny Stills coming out and being outspoken about Stephen Ross and what he's doing, is Kenny Stills going to be on the trade block soon? Could Kenny Stills be somebody that we are overlooking because he's been stuck in Miami and could be elsewhere soon? And could that also open the door for Preston Williams? I feel like between Devontae Parker being banged up and this Kenny Stills situation, and Albert Wilson's not really healthy yet, Jakeem Grant's not really healthy yet, I think we're going to get to see Preston Wilson get some garbage time action this year.
Yeah, Preston Williams.
Preston Williams. Preston
Right.
Wilson, that's a baseball. My God, my brain.
You and your baseball.
He was like a center fielder 20 years ago.
Exactly what I was thinking. Matt, who do you have there? Because it's been days since our man Zook, R.I.P. to Zook, right? Pour one out.
Yeah, there we go.
Pouring out for Zook, right?
Who is this? This is my daughter's. One of my daughter's cats we're taking care of. This is Minx, and actually I call him Ironhead because you can see he's kind of big. So he's one of those big orange tabbies. So it's Todd Gurley Cat Day. Well, this is Ironhead. This is who we've got right here.
Okay, I thought I heard Ironhead meowing in the background there.
He wanted to come in, so I decided to let him in.
Let him in. Here we go. Jamie asks in the chat room, how many Kangol hats has Sigmund bought in his short life?
0, actually. What I've got is I do have a Gorin Brothers leather hat. I like my it was an Australian Outback hat, but I have to say the hat game here in New Orleans is really, really important. So I have tried to upgrade my hat game. Maybe I'll try the Kangol. I think that Matt Waldman would be much better at rocking the Kangol than me.
I tend to agree with that statement.
Yeah.
By the way, Brian wants to know, since it is a Bronco show, would you rather have Tariq the Freak Cohen or Rolls Royce Freeman in PPR Dynasty, Matt?
I'd rather have Royce Freeman at this point. And I think he's a better value still. People are still sleeping on him, it seems like. And I just look at this situation, and when you mentioned that the coaches said Devonta Freeman, Tevin Coleman, I'm sold because I know what that dynamic is from watching the Falcons for several years now for football guys.
And who's Freeman and who's Coleman? We know that.
Yeah, exactly. We know for sure, and now with Theo Riddick out of the picture for a little bit of time too, you're probably going to see a few more catches for Royce Freeman coming his way. And I think that Tariq Cohen's upside is pretty much capped by 1, Mitchell Trubisky, and 2, by the trio, by also David Montgomery and Mike Davis when you look at this. So Tariq Cohen may have a higher floor, or arguably a higher floor, maybe in perception. But I think Royce Freeman has the opportunity, even with Joe Flacco at the helm, playing at his most Flaccoist. You could probably say that Royce Freeman is still probably a mid-range to high-range running back too.
Flaccoist. I could go so many directions, but I won't because I don't want to say sorry, Joe. And by the way, the Broncos do listen to this show, so Joe Flacco's fine. It's great. What are you talking about? Bloom,
I'm
do you agree?
hater, that's all.
You just hate Elway. That's why. Browns fan.
That's
Bloom,
right.
do you agree with Matt here?
I do.
Is it Royce over Tariq the Freak?
I do, because we know what Tariq Cohen is. And Tariq Cohen is a useful player. I think his numbers were inflated a little bit by one of those games with Chase Daniel last year, but he's a useful player in PPR leagues. He's good for bye weeks. He's good for injuries. He's good for matchup flex plays. But I don't think that he's going to be ever more than what he was last year. It's a high watermark for fantasy for him, where we don't know what Royce Freeman is yet. I think, as you've pointed out multiple times, Cecil, Royce Freeman didn't really get a chance to run in a system that he was comfortable in last year, a system that is suited to his strengths. I think that we have a new frontier with Rich Scangarello, with Mike Munchak. That's very important in this offensive line, additions on the offensive line. So the allure of the unknown puts me down on Freeman's side.
All right, it is the Audible Live, going through some of your questions in the chat room. Of course, we've got some preseason games going on right now. I guess, Bloom, I'll throw this to you since one, Jason Wood. I'll speak out of turn here. I'll tell little tales. One, Jason Wood was texting me about your man crush, Kyler Murray.
Yeah.
So me and Woodrow going back and forth on that, and looks like Kyler was running for his life behind that Arizona offensive line tonight.
Well, John Gruden, I think probably we talk about John Kitna, Cease, right? So I suppose what happened in the preseason tonight was John Gruden showing the rest of the league, hey, let's just disguise our pressures. Let's throw all kinds of pressures and see if this team's going to keep coming out shotgun spread. Can Kyler handle it? And he didn't look like he could handle it tonight. But it's the preseason. And this is more of a large topic on how much should we read into teams' performances in the preseason. And I'm positive that we could find some teams that absolutely headed into the tank and we watch in their preseason and they look like that. And we could also find teams that look terrible and had seasons they made the Super Bowl, and vice versa. We could find teams that
Lions were undefeated in the preseason, went 0-16 one year.
Right. Exactly. So it's really difficult. And the other thing about this that adds a twist is there was some talk that, look, Cliff Kingsbury is not going to actually show anything until week 1. Which you can say that's wise or not wise, and we can argue over whether that's happening. But I'm taken back to Cam Newton's preseason. Do y'all remember Cam Newton's first preseason?
No, we don't. So tell us a story.
People were declaring victory. He was terrible. He looked overwhelmed. He was not ready for prime time, or at least he looked that way in the preseason. And we all know where it went from there during his rookie year. He won't be a waiver wire pickup, but he helped win leagues. Murray's going to cost you a 7th, 8th, 9th round pick. Maybe you back off a little bit of that. But I have a feeling that this is going to be something that maybe Detroit mimics in week 1, and we'll see if they're better prepared. I'm not necessarily backing off of positivity about Arizona. But that being said, I think I'm interested to hear what Cliff Kingsbury says after the game. And I'm interested to see if this helps Kyler Murray, because of Matt, we've talked about this before, that if there's anything that you want with Murray as a defense, you want him thinking. And if this plants a little seed, a little bit, a tick, something that gives him hesitation, then that could be the beginning of a bad trend.
Well, John Gruden might have actually done the rest of the league a disservice, because you show stuff to Murray like that, he can adapt to it. Now, he'll have to adapt to it behind a god-awful offensive line. And Matt, the reason why Bloom and I were debating in the preseason watch list, the Cardinals episode, was because there's no value with Kyler Murray. Yes, I know running quarterbacks can be top 10 fantasy, Tim Tebow, blah, 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 blah. Like we've talked about this to death. But with Kyler Murray, because of that hype train, because of there's no value with him, it's like, okay, where do you come down on Kyler Murray in his fantasy perspective? We'll throw in Kingsbury not showing anything. We'll throw in his performance tonight. Like, just everything with Kyler Murray. What are you thinking, Matt?
Well, I think it's basically a light show that's been going on in the preseason with the same subject that's been standing still since it was drafted, which is basically we got to see how Kyler Murray handles pressure in the pocket. He has, people compare him to Russell Wilson. It's a slap in the face to Russell Wilson, even when he was younger, when he first came in the league, because Russell Wilson actually understood how to move in the pocket and make efficient movements and keep his eyes downfield. And Kyler Murray is
Who makes that reference, by the way, Matt? I want to call him out publicly because that's the worst reference you
can
could
I add a list? I mean, just go to any big box media outlet and click. I mean, wow. NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox, ESPN, NFL.com. You want to, I mean, anything with three,
you
letters
all
other than
suck.
Football guys.
That's the most awful comparison you could have for Kyler Murray.
It's lame because really, as much as Kyler Murray has moments where he can climb in the pocket in rhythm and keep his eyes downfield, when he's forced to move side to side, which is the more difficult way to maneuver the pocket, he doesn't do that. He has Michael Vick syndrome. He drops his eyes, makes an incredibly agile move or athletic move, but then he loses rhythm and sight of his progressions when he does that. So then he looks back up, and now the progression that he that he might have been able to throw to, well, that's passed now because you made this like 4-yard jump cut to your right and had to, it was dynamic, and the figure skating judges probably gave you or gymnastic judges probably gave you a 10, but this is football and you need to keep your eyes downfield. So that kind of issue is difficult because it's going to prevent him from really being able to access his second and third reads if he consistently does it due to interior pressure. But interior pressure is hard to get. And so it's one of those things where he's going to be up and down. And I just look at his play, and I think the real key to this has been the same thing all along. Will the offensive line get better? Will he get better? Or will he start hot with the offensive line starting hot and then things deteriorate and then he struggles? But I think he's going to have half of a season where it's going to be good, half of a season where it's going to be bad. And those who are drafting Kyler Murray are banking on it being good at the second half of the season, just like Lamar Jackson and to an extent Josh Allen. And so, that's the hope there, and hope that he can develop. And certainly Michael Vick was a dynamic fantasy option, even if he wasn't nearly the quarterback he could have been, other than when he was yes sir, no sir, anything you want me to do, Andy Reid, because I'm just glad to be out of prison right now.
So what you're saying is Kyler Murray needs to go to prison to make his game really come into focus.
No, that's what you said.
That's what she said. What? Okay, wrong show. Anyway, it is the Audible Live. Sigmund Bloom, Matt Waldman, Cecil Lammey, and our man Jacob in the chat room again saying, man, would it be safe to say the practice hype, Curtis Samuel and David Montgomery will be first-round picks by the end of August? My gosh. Let's talk about Curtis Samuel, Bloom. Sure. Interesting news item coming across the wire today at footballguys.com about one Curtis Samuel, and it's gotten me excited. And I know that we're all excited about Samuel taking that next step, that next leap forward. And I know some people might want to say CSU, Colorado State, is wide receiver U. Not as long as Ohio State's there doing their thing. What does that mean for Curtis Samuel to do his thing, Bloom?
Yeah, it's interesting because they don't seem to do much at Ohio State to develop the receivers. It's just when they get to the league, they're ready. Michael Thomas, and we'll see about Paris Campbell. He was ahead of the curve. The Curtis Samuel thing's interesting, and I
don't
guess
forget McLovin.
Yeah, and Devin Smith is still in a camp, right? Devin Smith isn't dead yet in the NFL terms. Of course, he's still alive and kicking. Look, this is where I'll go off on a little bit of a tangent and invoke the fantasy community, because there's a lot of DJ Moore love out there. And I've seen more than one analyst that I respect say, well, all this Curtis Samuel stuff is well and good, but DJ Moore is obviously going to be better. I mean, there's no way that Curtis Samuel is going to overtake DJ Moore. And that just gives me pause, because on most any level, they're similar. Age-wise, they're similar. And especially when you consider that Curtis Samuel wasn't really even a wide receiver prospect a few years ago. He was hurt in the first 2 years of his career. So his arc as a developmental receiver has just as high a peak as DJ Moore's in terms of draft capital. Even over the last 6 weeks of the season, they had roughly the same production, roughly the same targets. So now we fast forward to what I'm calling the summer of Sam, the summer of Samuel, and every single day he is wowing onlookers. Cam Newton's deep ball's back. That's not DJ Moore's game. Also, DJ Moore's game overlaps a little more with Christian McCaffrey, overlaps a little more with Greg Olsen, where Curtis Samuel's game doesn't really overlap with anybody, maybe Torrey Smith like 5 years ago. So all these things point to me to there being at least a 50-50 chance that Samuel outproduces Moore. And I don't understand why it's being treated as a foreclosed topic that's already been decided. But I'm curious what one Mr. Matt Waldman does with his hot potato.
Right, Matt. Hot potato is yours. You can throw in David Montgomery, my motorboat rookie of the year, by the way. When I tell people that don't listen to the show, first off, why don't you listen to the show? But whenever I bring that up, I think somebody in person, I had a public appearance this week, and they're like, what do you think of David Montgomery? I was like, he's my motorboat rookie of the year. And then I had to explain like motorboat, big butt, running back, and I think I lost a fan. But anyway, I gained more love for David Montgomery.
You gain love from us still, the fact that you even went to the lengths to do that.
Exactly.
So.
Well, you had to explain. I just can't say motorboat rookie of the year without explaining. I like big butts on my running backs, and I cannot lie, Matt. Your thoughts on Samuel and the Montgomery hype trains?
Yeah, well, I mean, with Samuel, here's the thing. Samuel is a better vertical player, so you can't discount his ability to end up being a better fantasy option than Moore just due to that. Because yes, DJ Moore is not a good win the ball player in the vertical game. Now, that said, as much as I respect Matt Harmon's, perception, and he talked about how Samuel was in the 94th percentile with the routes that he ran. One thing that I do notice that sets DJ Moore apart from Samuel is while Curtis Samuel played running back at Ohio State occasionally, he played running back. He wasn't a running back. He was a guy who can get outside and showed some patience. And he could play one on TV, but he wasn't going to play one in the NFL. DJ Moore didn't play running back, but you bet your ass that when it came to somebody trying to hit him, they felt like they got hit by a running back. And when you watch him after the catch against first, second, or third level defenders, it's kind of awe-inspiring to watch his contact balance. But more so than that, because, you look and you say, oh, well, great, that overlaps with McCaffrey. Well, one thing that Samuel doesn't do as well as Moore, that Olsen doesn't do at all, and that McCaffrey isn't asked to do, is run intermediate routes in the middle of the field. And while Samuel has great yak skill, and while he's a good route runner, he's not as good in that area of the field. And Moore is better after the catch. He runs crisper routes. He understands how to transition better than Samuel, who oftentimes tries to square up the defender as soon as he catches the ball, wastes time, and tries to make a move. Whereas Moore's been better at immediately getting downfield and actually maximizing yardage. And I've shown a couple of plays back-to-back with those two guys running the same routes against the same team in the same area of the field, and giving you an idea of why Moore was a little bit better in that regard. So I look at this, and while they both are good yards after the catch players, I think Moore offers a little bit in a more refined way. And so to me, they're going to complement each other down the line. But the one who's really going to, if either one's going to become a premier player, one of them's going to have to win the ball at the catch point on rebound situations and make some of those tough plays. And right now, neither one of them really does that extremely well. Curtis Samuel will go up and win a ball and take a hit, but he doesn't climb over people. They need somebody with a Steve Smith element or a Muhsin Muhammad element to their game. And I'm not sure either one's going to provide that. I wouldn't be surprised in 2 years if the Panthers are drafting another wide receiver who actually can offer that. And when it comes to David Montgomery, listen, great after contact runner, great balance, good receiver. I like the hype. The videos don't really do justice to the hype because that's kind of like right answer, wrong process to talk about people arm slapping him and saying, "Look at all the tackles he's breaking in practice."
There's a lot of that out there, isn't there, Matt?
And there is. There's like tons of it. I mean, so much so that the RSP put out a like, here's a fan advisory video on what you shouldn't be looking for in practice. But with that in mind, he's a guy that I think has the opportunity to carve out a running back 2 niche as his upside this year. If Tariq Cohen gets hurt, he could wind up being a running back 1 on this team. But I would say the safe way to look at him is running back 3 floor, running back 2 upside right now.
The Audible Live, Bloom, we're going extreme close-up just because I like clicking the buttons. But and with Dave Montgomery on all the good hype, right?
Yeah.
We still see he's got enough juice. I don't think this is, something that's held Zach Zenner back, and we've had great debates about Zach Zenner on this show, but was that lack of enough juice to what he does. I think Montgomery has enough, Bloom. It's not an overabundance of juice in his cuts and his moves and his legs, but I believe it's enough to be effective and to carry over this production into the regular season.
It is. And look, if he just gets the goal line carries and carries finishing out games, I mean, if he gets something like, not to the extent that Jordan Howard got because Mike Davis is there, he can be a par. He can reproduce the value for a 4th or 5th round pick that you want, a running back 2 with some peaks and some valleys. But there was a proclamation by one of the Chicago beat writers, I think, that said he's clearly going to lead the team in rushing yards, carries, and rushing touchdowns. And he can do that and still be a disappointment at his ADP because he's being drafted closer to his ceiling than, say, Miles Sanders or Darrell Henderson or Justice Hill or Darwin Thompson, other rookie running backs that have that unknown allure. But I think you're right. He has enough juice. But I also think Matt is right that a lot of this contact balance, a lot of the tackle breaking stuff we've seen in practice and in the preseason is still something that we can't necessarily translate over. But we will all get a good look at him. I can already look forward to that week 1 game, Thursday night, the Bears-Packers game, the first game we've been waiting so long. So it's time to overreact to it.
Okay, got about 4 minutes left in the show. So, Matt, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask you a question. You just give me the answer as succinctly as possible, even if you just name the name, because we got a couple questions in the chat room I wanted to get to. Clint, would you rather have Terrell Williams or Larry Fitzgerald in half PPR?
Larry Fitzgerald.
Pot of K. Why?
Because basically he's the only experienced receiver on that Cardinals offense, and I think that he's also the only guy that I trust to actually make contested catches on off-target throws.
Or Lepoise, Bloom, Dylan, Justin Jackson, or Eckler if Gordon holds out.
Eckler got like 12 snaps to Justin Jackson's 4 and looked good. And I think Eckler is one of those guys that you're getting close to writing in pen if he's still there in the 7th round.
Why didn't Eckler look a little bit better last year when he had to fill in for Gordon?
He was a little banged up. And look, I'm not saying don't take Jackson at ADP, which is 5-6 rounds later, because Eckler could easily go down and maybe not be. Eckler was actually more efficient and produced better on a per touch basis when Gordon was in. So I'm not foreclosing Jackson, but Eckler's the first one we turn to.
It is the Audible Live here as we go through, and just a couple minutes left in the show. Matt, any concern about Le'Veon Bell not playing in the preseason?
No real concern about that. I mean, the bigger concern is that offensive line and really the surrounding talent that he's working with. Though the biggest concern I have is the word foreclosing that Bloom's using
twice.
That's kind of making me a little nervous.
I don't own. I'm a rent. You're an own guy, so you should be more worried about it. Yeah.
Bloom. By the way, Steven says Darwin Thompson drumbeat.
Yeah.
Louder.
Yeah, because he got first team carries at the goal line, snaps, and then another. So look, I get it. People want to bristle at this, but it was Greg Rosenthal, and then it was the Kansas City beat writer and radio guy, and now the guy from The Athletic saying, I'm leaving him off of my. Well, Greg Rosenthal said he's a potential surprise cut. Now, 2 different people covering the Chiefs when they've done a projected 53 have left him off the 53. So I think the deal is that they know what Hyde is. They don't know what Thompson is yet, but if he continues to be what he has been, then maybe Hyde is the has-been on the roster.
Yeah, we've seen it before with him as well. Mello wants to know, where does Matt stand on his assessment of Hakeem Butler?
Basically, stay patient. We know that he's had concentration drops, and that's an issue that a lot of young receivers have because they're learning a new system and they start to overthink things. And when you look at some of the plays that he's actually made in camp that were the positive plays, you see evidence of good releases, skill to set up defenders, ability to stack, ability to track the ball and leave room for the sideline. So there's a lot of positives there, in addition to the fact that he's probably one of the better after contact runners after the catch. But right now they say he has a ways to go because it's probably about the more mental aspects of the game, such as making sure that you're lined up with the correct split, understanding the option route you're supposed to throw, understanding the different blitz reads and all the mental part of the game that are more added on to the NFL that he has a ways to go with. But the physical concepts, I'm not worried about. I'm not worried about him dropping some passes unless you were worried about Brandon Marshall, Terrell Owens, and Chad Johnson.
Brandon wants to know, Bloom, are we going to make it through an entire show without mentioning Kiki Cutie?
Yeah, well, I guess not. But I think that Dr. Gene already mentioned him too. Duke Johnson, get Duke Johnson. Honestly, I think that the ADP hasn't necessarily adjusted in every draft. If he's there, 8th, 9th, 10th round, he's freed. And I think that if Cutie is hurt to begin the season, then Johnson will have that role and could be a big hit to begin the season.
Big hits for you right here on this program. It is the Audible, and we are live. Thank you very much, everyone out there, for watching this program. Thanks for liking, commenting, subscribing, hitting the bell notification, commenting on the actual video, because the chat room comments are different than the comments on the video, and I don't know. Nobody understands YouTube and the algorithm, but please, if you guys do that, it definitely helps the channel. You want to help out Football Guys? Well, subscribe to our free daily newsletter at footballguys.com. All the hottest news, hot and fresh every single morning, right to your inbox. It is our Football Guys free daily newsletter. Also, our Draft Dominator app is free. Yes, we are crazy. Yes, we made the best app for drafting free this year. Check it out in your app store, whether you got an iPhone or you got an Android, doesn't matter. Draft Dominator app from footballguys.com. It is free this year. Also, programming note, go buy some tickets for my fantasy draft party at 1043thefan.com. Anyway, that's a wrap. Everyone, thank you very much for watching. For the great Sigmund Bloom and the fantastic Matt Waldman, I'm Cecil Lammey saying stay tuned and stay frosty.
I like the Mallard.